Okay, so when I first reviewed the iPad Pro last November, I focused on the seriously amped up hardware design. I figured the iOS 12 software story hadn't really changed, so there was no point in revisiting it. Many of you, of course, allowed yourselves to retort, and you were right. So, 2 weeks later, I redid my review. I went over why I felt the iPad Pro was less a laptop replacement and more a laptop alternative. And then I went through a few of the ways I was hoping Apple would improve the software in the future to take better advantage of all that new hardware. Well, that future is now. iOS 13 and iPadOS. Yes, the iPad still runs iOS 13 with just the beginnings of some iPadOS differentiation. They offer some major enhancements to the iPad's capabilities. I'm not going to review it or re-review it now. All the new software is still all up in beta, so it wouldn't just be premature, it would be downright silly. Everything from performance to stability to implementations can and will change over the next couple of months. This fall though, once Apple ships all the new bits, game on. Instead, what I'm going to do right now in this video is go down my previous list from that previous video, everything I said I needed to make the iPad Pro in specific, but any modern iPad in general, my main machine, and see, at least in theory, how far it's all come. Hit subscribe, 3D touch, oh wait, nope, long press that bell gizmo so you don't miss any of the videos I have coming your way all of this week, and then let's do this. I'm Rene Ritchie, and this is Vector. Apple solved photo and video access in the early days of iOS with the Image Picker and Photos app. It took them years to solve it for anything else though, with Document Picker and the Files app. Likewise, we've had the ability to import photos and videos over USB and SD card for a while now. But with iOS 13, you can now do it with any file. It's safer and more secure than how a Mac or PC works because iOS ignores executables. Yeah, sorry, still no sideloading. It focuses only on data, and that means there's way less of a surface area for malware to attack. Plug USB-C straight in or break out your favorite dongle for USB-A, SD, or Lightning, and your files will just show up. You can even mount Samba shares to get your networking on. Apple also created an entirely new security-first USB stack to support it. It's sandboxed, of course, supports only files, no executables, and should be hardened against any current JuiceJack or other malware attacks. It works on every iPad, USB-C Pros and traditional Lightning alike, and on iPhone and iPod Touch as well, literally anything that runs iOS 13. And because Photo still has to win, you can now pipe images and videos directly into editing apps as well, no preloading necessary. Everything I hoped for, and more. Yes, it was born with this giant multi-touch screen, just begging to be multi-touched. But sometimes it's just not ergonomic, convenient, or optimal. iOS 13 offers much better keyboard support, both for shortcuts and for navigation. While I'm gonna have to play around with it some more, Apple says we should be able to navigate completely, fully, just with the keyboard, which is honestly, again, more than I hoped for. Also, though they didn't build off something like the Apple TV's Focus UI and used Assistive Touch instead, they've managed to provide a form of mouse and trackpad support as well. It's not really a pointer system since iOS was never built with that GUI concept in mind, but it's kind of like a targeting system. You put the crosshairs where you want them and then hit any interactive element you want. Apple sees it as an accessibility feature, and that's where you'll find it in settings. But as Apple and many of us have said repeatedly, accessibility really is for everyone, anytime. If you add in voice control, which I covered in my previous iPadOS video, Apple has made it so you can control your iPad using whatever interaction method is better for you in any given moment. Not by grafting it to a Mac or PC paradigm, but by making it more capable unto itself. This is all also available to iPhone and iPod Touch, any iOS 13 device, and again, one more time, way more than I expected. Load Reddit or YouTube or any Google site on your iPad, and prior to last week, what did you get? Chances are the iPhone optimized version of the page stretched out mockingly across that big iPad screen. It was part legacy, with iPad presenting as mobile Safari and supporting more mobile than desktop browser features, part laziness, with even the big companies failing to do the media calls necessary to distinguish the tablet from a phone, or putting any extra work at all into supporting the bigger screen. While all I was hoping for was the ability to set get desktop version on a per site basis like Apple added a while back for reader mode, what we got was so much more, full on Mac class Safari for iPad. Now, as far as I know, those websites didn't do anything to help here, but Apple did a ton of heavy lifting, including adding support for specific web application programming interfaces like Visual Viewport that would make even G Suite just work. Apple also added support for pointer events, which abstract away the difference between mouse or trackpad interactions and touch interactions for websites that have adopted them. And hopefully, this will encourage a lot more websites, especially the deeper and more complex websites, to do just that. Balancing showing a full desktop site with making everything legible on a sometimes much smaller iPad screen was also considered, especially when it comes to iPad mini and side-by-side or slide-over Safari views. There, it'll still default to the mobile version if and when that makes more sense. All of this is also available in the Safari web controller, so that any iOS app that embeds a web view will get all of this goodness for quote-unquote free. There's also a download manager, 30 of your favorite keyboard shortcuts, the ability to save tab sets, control text size, which is great for accessibility, and adjust settings per site, and more. I wish Apple had done this years ago, back when the original iPad Pro shipped, but I'm really glad they put in the time and polish to do it now. Now, Apple did kinda sorta give me a couple other things I asked for in my Future of iOS video, linked below, including at least the potential for a theme kit with semantic dynamic colors. And while we didn't get a font kit, we did get fonts as apps, which could end up being worse, better, or just different, but solves a whole bunch of other problems. But one of the things I asked for, but still haven't gotten, is the ability to handle more complex workflows, specifically, in my case, podcasting. On the Mac, I can fire up communication software like FaceTime or Skype, recording software like Audio Hijack, Call Recorder, even QuickTime, record my end, record all ends, and end up with the tracks I need to edit together a show. On the iPad, even running iOS 13 and iPadOS, it still doesn't look like I can do that locally on a single device. Even an audio recorder the way we get a screen recorder would be great, providing Apple could push a warning to other iOS devices that the audio is being recorded. Anything that could make that workflow work would go a long way to making the iPad just work for a growing swath of audio professionals. Apple surprised a lot of people, including and especially developers, by announcing SwiftUI, their new declarative interface builder for Xcode. It's part of Apple's ongoing efforts, from APFS to the Swift language, to reinvent their foundational technologies without having to rip and replace the entire stack all at once, like they did almost 2 decades ago with Next. What Apple didn't do, though, was bring any of that to the iPad. No Xcode for iPad, no SwiftUI design tools for iPad, no nothing, at least not yet. When Apple launched the iPad, it launched amazingly creative and productive tools with it, and following it, like GarageBand, iMovie, and the iWork suite. Since then, other companies have made amazing apps like Ferrite for podcast editing, Affinity for photo editing, LumaFusion for video editing, Pythonista for development. But Adobe still hasn't been able to ship Photoshop, and Apple still hasn't said anything about Logic Pro 10, Final Cut Pro 10, or, Xcode. It's possible, like Adobe, Apple is wrestling with the memory and screen size constraints of the iPad. No 8 or 16 gigabytes, much less 1.5 terabytes of RAM, and no 16, 27, or 32-inch display options, at least not natively, not unless you plug the latest iPad Pro into an external USB-C display. But maybe also with the nature of iPad versions themselves. Adobe is careful to say they're bringing real Photoshop to the iPad. Real, not full. That means it's built using real Adobe Photoshop code, but it's not providing the full set of features Photoshop has grown, maybe bloated, to support over the last few decades. So for some workflows, it may be nearly full. For others, not nearly at all. For Photoshop, and likely for Final Cut Pro 10, Logic Pro 10, and Xcode, what should be brought over and what can be brought over needs to be figured out before the iPad can take that next big step forward. We've finally gotten multi-user on iOS, but only for Apple TV and HomePod. Depending on your needs and point of view, that either makes perfect sense because of the more family-oriented nature of those living room devices, or it's yet another Rochambeau in your wish list hopes and dreams. I'm personally leaning towards the latter, because Apple does provide a form of multi-user for iPad already, one that predates both Apple TV and HomePod. but only for schools. I realize it's way easier to implement on streaming boxes and managed devices, which is why those are probably the ones that have already been implemented. But everything from a guest board, so I can just lend my device to someone at a conference who just wants to check something out on the web, or a school board, so kids can be locked to a pre-approved set of apps and capabilities, like guided access but for more than one thing at a time, to the ability to switch accounts if the iPad is the family computer would still be great. Of course, my big ask, going back almost 5 years, was for iPadOS, and wow did all of us get that this year, including not just all the quote-unquote, if you can drag it, you can drop it into its own window multi-instant multitasking, but a new, denser home screen that even lets you do something else I asked for, have the -1 home screen widgets available on Home Screen Prime. And yeah, it's all shades of ironic iPad got today on the home screen the same year Dashboard was finally killed off completely on the Mac. Live on in spirit, little widgets. Apple has even melded 3D Touch with long press, not just significantly reducing interactive complexity and collision, but it's made things like home screen shortcuts work on the iPad now as well. It might just be mostly a name for now, but like I said in my last video, the power of the iPadOS name is exactly what the iPad has always needed. Now, if you want to be ready to take full advantage of all the new capability and productivity, check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 25,000 classes in video, audio, business, and more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high-quality classes on must-know topics so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities, and do the work you love. Check out Thomas Frank of YouTube and College Info Geek. He offers the Productivity Masterclass. Learn to create a simple, customized productivity system that will transform your personal and professional life, allowing you to go after your dreams and achieve your goals. Join the millions of students already learning on Skillshare today and get 2 months of unlimited access to over 25,000 classes for free. To sign up, visit the link in the description and start learning today. Thanks Skillshare, and thanks to all of you for supporting the show. So with iOS 13 and iPadOS, can the iPad Pro finally replace your laptop? Trick question. It always could for some people and still can't for others. Just like asking if a MacBook can replace your iMac. It depends entirely on what you want and need to do with it. It's why Apple still makes both, still announces new versions of both at the very same events, and why some people, like me, still use both. With iOS 13 and iPadOS though, the slider has definitely moved far closer to yes for far more people. It's becoming less about what you want to do and more about how you want to do it. I'll dive deeper into all of this in my iOS 13 and iPadOS previews in a couple weeks and in my full-on reviews this fall. For now, hit like if you do, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and then hit up the comments and let me know, what did iPadOS cross off your wish list and what still remains? Thank you so much for watching, and see you next video.